specimens.
You have no problem with this? You yourself as a...
I have a problem with that, yes, of course. I protested against that in 1979. I'm a different generation, but I should tell you, Dr. Heinrich Gross was successful in bringing his papers into the international world. Gross said, we have the largest collection of brain specimens in the world to research on brain malformations. So we can document that, we can provide data for international science, and that's why we are doing that. This is a quote, I'm paraphrasing that. It's not my explanation. That comes from him.
Now, the main concern is really not what happened during the Nazi period, but how was it possible that Gross continued to function in this hospital until his retirement and beyond. Way which to my mind is in a way even more significant than the heinous crimes he committed in the 40s.
We learned that Dr. Gross was living in a small town in the suburbs of Vienna.
This is the house.
So you want to be right here?
I brought a neurologist friend of mine, Dr. Dan Luciano, along on the trip, in the hope that Dr. Gross might be more willing to speak to a fellow brain researcher. Perhaps if we focused the conversation on the nature of his research, Dr. Gross would grant us an interview.
You got to make sure you cannot see any.
Over here. You buy that?
Did you buy that? In the tie?
A little higher.
A little obvious. There we go.
Yeah, like that, okay?
All right, good. Let's go. Is that at number 14? The only house in the neighborhood with barbed wire is Dr. Gross's house.
Yep, gotta press the button.
Not here. There's like a week's worth of mail in here.
This is not a good sign.
No.
Das Haus ist leer.
Das ist leer, ja.
Und wer wohnt, wer hat dahin gewohnt?
Da haben zwei altes Ehepaar gewohnt, die sind beide schon gestorben.
Oh well.
What did he say?
He said the people who lived here are dead and it's empty now. But he said Dr. Gross didn't live here.
Friedrich Almeida, 4 Jahre. Margot Fischbeck, 8 Jahre. Johanna Schmid, 3 Jahre. Franz Horvath, 1 Jahr. Günther Mann, 7 Monate. Helga Nieber, 12 Jahre. Elisabeth Strassmeier, 6 Jahre. Irmgard Harder, 10 Jahre. Helmut Spitzkopf, 2 Jahre. Helene Schodl, 10 Jahre.
Dr. Gross and his colleagues had overseen the killings of over 700 children. Some of the brains had been cut into so many pieces that the process of identifying and preparing each child's brain for the funeral was a huge endeavor. I asked to meet the lab technician who was in charge of this difficult task. His name was Robert Weiss, and he allowed our crew to return to the brain room without supervision from the hospital administration.
Das sind die Gefäße, wo die Präparatenteile, womit sie beerdigt wurden. Hier sind noch, in solchen Säckchen wurden sie verpackt, auch die Schnitte, auch die Paraffine, und wurden dann hier in diese Urne hineingelegt und die Urne wurde dann verschlossen. Wenn man einem die Chance gibt, glaube ich, da mitzuarbeiten, ja, das wirklich kennenzulernen, dann denkt man ganz anders. Und heute fühle ich mich mit den Angehörigen irrsinnig verbunden. Und ich war auch auf dieser Beerdigung für die Angehörigen, wurde ich eingeladen. Ich müsste unbedingt dabei sein und ich habe so irrsinnig viel Anerkennung bekommen von den Angehörigen, die sicherlich sehr Schwieriges durchgemacht haben. Aber trotzdem haben sie diese Arbeit irrsinnig gewürdigt, die ich da gemacht habe. Und das war wunderschön.
I was impressed by Mr. Weiss's sincerity. It was clearly a personal mission for him to ensure that the victims would be buried with as much dignity as possible. I felt like there was more that he wanted to tell us, but couldn't. Then he left, leaving us behind.
Right now, I'm just blown away by the fact that we've been left alone in the brain room. Somehow we've managed to get in here alone. She was born March 26, 1936, and killed November 29, 1942. It just blows me away this stuff is still here, you know? And the fact, well, this is the real find. This is the real room that we weren't allowed to go into, but somehow we've ended up alone without any supervision in the back room. It's amazing to see just how many pieces of brains are lying around here. Got slides in there. These are all little pieces of brains.
Franz Krolik, 17 Jahre. Karl Eschek, 16 Jahre.
I felt that Mr. Weiss was trying to tell me that despite the very public funeral, privately, this nation still had not really come to terms with its history.
Österreich nimmt heute Abschied von Hunderten von Kindern, die der menschenverachtenden Ideologie des Nationalsozialismus zum Opfer gefallen sind. Diese dunkle Seite unserer Geschichte muss uns stets gegenwärtig bleiben, dass nämlich der Mantel des Schweigens über die damaligen Ereignisse gebreitet wird, gebreitet bleibt.
With the nation focusing on the victims, I was surprised to learn that there were also survivors. Because of Austria's denial of its own Nazi past, it had taken over 50 years for these people to receive any compensation for their suffering. I was also shocked to discover that many of the survivors were not mentally or physically handicapped. Stretching their laws of eugenics, the Nazis labeled so-called antisocial behavior as a hereditary disease.
Sagen haben, ein bisschen ausführlicher zum Erzählen. Ich bin ein eheliches Kind, aber trotzdem ein Findelkind. Man hat mich ausgesetzt, hat mich dann von dem Pflegeplatz wegen Verwahrlosung und schwere Misshandlungen auf die Küste gegeben, auf die Übernahmestelle. Von dort war ich dann 20 Monate am Spielgrund. Wir waren alle durch die Bank, durch psychische Belastungen, Angst, Härte, Strafen, Sadismus, waren wir eigentlich alle durch die Bank Bettnässer. Man hat uns die Leintücher über den Kopf geschlagen und man hat mir Minusgraden müssen, auf Steinböden stehen, so wie dass mir beide Zehen abgefroren sind. Und mit diesen Zehen musste ich die Spaziergänge, ohne dass ich Schuhe anziehen konnte, musste ich mindestens. Ich bin bestraft worden, weil ich mir gesagt habe, ich habe Hunger. Da hat man mir das reingebampft. Der Magen hat das nicht vertragen, ich habe es wieder erbrochen. Man hat mir das Erbrochene wieder reingebampft. Man hat den Teller am Boden geschlagen und man musste das auflecken. Und wenn das Gesicht voll mit Essen war oder mit den Erbrochenen, hat man uns den Kopf in die Klomuschel gegeben und da hat man das Wasser runtergelassen. Und das war die Gesichtswäsche.
Ich hätte eine Frage zur Bestattungszeremonie am Sonntag. Ich würde gerne wissen, welche Bedeutung für Sie diese Zeremonie hat, mit welchen Gefühlen Sie auf diese Zeremonie am Sonntag zugehen.
Ich gehe mit einem großen Schmerz hin, denn es ist auch eine Cousine von mir am Spiegelgrund als Opfer der Euthanasie verstorben und mit einem großen Zorn, dass man diesen Mann, der ihr auch so viel Leid, das ich aus Akten jetzt erfahren durfte, nicht verurteilt.
To make his career, Gross does something that a lot of Austrians did at that time. He becomes a member of the Social Democrat Party, or the Socialist Party, then called the Socialist Party. Why? Because he wants to stay in Vienna, and Vienna was dominated by the socialists.
Through those connections, he got one job after the other. So he was helped onto the ladder, of climbing a ladder in the medical career.
Beginning of the 60s, Gross becomes a court examiner. He is an expert at court, being asked by the judge or a lawyer if the accused is able to stand the trial and if he is his mental constitution.
Es hat mit Sicherheit sehr viele, auch innerhalb der Justiz gegeben, die einem doch sehr stark belasteten Nationalsozialisten nicht unfreundlich entgegengestanden sind, weil sie selbst mit dieser Geschichte als Personen teilweise zu tun hatten.
Hohes Geschworenengericht, wir sind aufgrund unserer Untersuchungen zu folgendem Ergebnis gelangt. Der Angeklagte ist zweifellos nicht geisteskrank.
In 1980, he claims to have produced 12,000 court examinations, appraisals, which means beginning at the beginning of the 60s, which amounts to 600 of these appraisals a year, and that's about 2 a working day. Now you can't examine 2 people a day and produce the report on that. So what you do is you have standard sound bites you use to put into these reports. And lawyers and judges appreciated his work very much because he, as one lawyer told me, knew exactly what you want to hear.
I started asking some judges there, and I asked them, you know about his past. How can you have him as an expert at court? And one of them told me, you know, he's working fast. And he's working fast, and that's what we want.
Heinrich Gross was honored with this honorary cross for arts and science from the government. He was a very prominent figure. You could read about him all the time in the newspapers. He got an institute for the study of brain malformations, supported by the Ludwig Boltzmann Society for Science Funding, which is a very prominent society of science funding in Austria, named after a Jewish physicist.
He got people working for him, sometimes 8, 10 people working with him on these brains. He made dozens of publications saying we have the biggest part of brains all over the world of handicapped people or children.
Now, if you go through Gross's files and his publications, he actually states where the corpses came from, when the patients died. So when it said specimen from patient died November 43, it was obvious what he was doing, where he had got the brains from.
The brains were there all the time. You could openly see that, and no one noticed what the background was, or no one wanted to raise the issue or say anything about it.
There's a tendency now to say, well, we all didn't know about it, did we? That's what the officials say in the city council. That's what his colleagues say. That's what his members in the party say.
It means no medals for murder, because Dr. Heinrich Gross, a man who killed many children in the Nazi time, can every day go to the coffee house and has a medal from Austria.
The city of Vienna invited my journalist colleagues and I to the mayor's office for wine and cheese and speeches. It all seemed a little strange given the